hold hands and close your eyes. It's midnight, and you're listening to the Ghost Story Guys. Welcome to the Ghost Story Guys. I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Paul Vestal.
And this is a show where we talk about spooks, specters, and all the other things watching us from the shadows beyond the campfire. Some conversations only make sense after the sun has set, and this is most definitely one. Thanks for tuning in. This is episode number 201. And we're coming to you from that tiny mountain cabin you dream about, but can never quite reach. Paul, my friend, how are you doing?
I think I'm all right. I think I am. I broke my back, kind of.
I was going to say, I didn't want to say my broken friend, because that felt a little too on the nose.
Well, I am that as well.
Yeah, I am too, but not that way.
I'm like a bag of broken biscuits. I look a bit misshaped, but when you taste me, I'm delicious.
Yeah, you are all twisted up. You had a great engagement party on the weekend, and then your body just went, no.
Yeah, Monday my body went, you've had enough fun, you. I'm going to cripple you. So I've strained my lumbar, which is the muscle that surrounds the bottom of your spine. So essentially, I can't do some things that were perfectly normal on Monday morning. So yes, I'm learning new techniques how to do various domestic tasks, but it's improving and we're okay. Thankfully, I've had back problems in the past. But it was a very strange noise. I've never heard my internal muscles go crunch before.
Oh yeah,
without someone else sort of slide tackling me or elbowing me in the face. So it was a very unique sound. Like a bag of crisps being crushed next to your eardrum.
Oh, I heard that once, and it was from Nick. We just moved back to Victoria after getting married, and I can't remember, we were talking about things we used to be able to do when we were younger. And she says, well, I can do a bridge, like kind of put her hands and feet on the ground and like bridge her back up. She goes, right. let's see if I can still do it. So there was a crunching sound, which, as you're describing, and then she said, everything is going white. And then she just collapsed back in the bed. And she was fine, but oh god, it was a horrifying. I was so worried. It was a horrifying sound.
Yes, I remember that move because I did gymnastics as a child, so I got up to level 2 in the BARGA certification, the British Association, the British Association of Gymnastics. I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, it might have been British Athletics and Gymnastics. So anyway, so I could do the crab, front roll, backward roll, handstands, and then we didn't do it after that. They stopped it.
Well, neither did she, as it turns out.
Been 40 years now. I'm not sure I could still do the crab.
Well, let's not try and find out until after the recording. Then you can do as many deep knee bends or whatever as you want.
I don't know, I might break it back in.
It worked for the door of my Toyota. I see no reason why I can't work for your spine. My Monday did not involve my spine being compressed into a bag of chips, so that's good. I drove into Toronto to go see a double feature. It was an unusual double feature. It was The Roaring Twenties, a 1939 gangster film with Humphrey Bogart and James Cagney. Followed by Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, starring Renee Zellweger and Matthew McConaughey. And between them, I listened to a pretty talented blues guitarist in a bar next door, and had myself a pretty solid night. And I got to tell you, Paul, I don't know that Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a good movie or The Next Generation is a good movie, but I will say you can tell right away that Matthew McConaughey is a star, because that guy just chews the scenery and does not stop until he's gotten all the way to the back of the theater. It is an incredible performance.
Yeah. It's one of those great moments that sometimes happens in people's careers where they kind of, you can see that they've been having to do everything that they didn't really want to do. Like McConaughey made loads of crappy rom-coms and stuff that just weren't very good, and sort of uninspiring comedy action films and stuff. Was it Sahara? I think the Sahara
that's
one
exactly the one that leaped to my mind too, was Sahara.
And so you could see he was clearly very frustrated. And sometimes actors can get stuck in that rut and they end up getting to like 65 and thinking, where's my career gone? And he, I don't know why or how or whatever, but fair play to him, because I saw him do the Dallas Buyers Club and True Detective within 12 months of each other, and my opinion of him just changed overnight. I just thought, what a phenomenal actor. Phenomenal actor.
Throw Interstellar on top of that, that's a hell of a hat trick. I don't know that he'll ever equal Vilmer, the insane redneck with a robot leg. But we will see. He's still got a lot of juice left in his career.
You never know who might turn up in Sonic 4.
Fingers crossed. Well, on this episode, we are not sharing Matthew McConaughey stories. Very sad to say. However, Maddie McSee, if you do have a ghost story, get in touch. Hot
damn. He has got one, actually, hasn't he?
Does he?
Didn't he grow up in a haunted house?
I don't know. I know. I've, apart from him being from Texas and the story I told you about his predilections at parties in the patron bonus, I don't know anything about him.
Yeah, I'm sure I've seen something a few years ago about him talking about. I'm not sure if it was a little girl in a blue dress used to live in his house.
Interesting.
He's very into and open to the paranormal, is Mr. McConaughey.
Okay, no, I did not know that. I ddid hear. I heard an interview with David Howard Thornton, who plays Art the Clown in those Terrifier films. He has an interesting ghost story, which I won't tell here because I want to get over to the stories. But yeah, he actually sounds like he also sounds like a good dude, and yeah, a very, very interesting personal ghost story. But maybe if I remember, we'll get to that as we tell stories of haunted prisons, not haunted actors. No, sad to say, haunted prisons. This is the follow-up to our original haunted prisons episode one or number 196. I want to say something like that. No, okay.
Sorry, I was waiting for the editor to interject.
Yeah, no, that's fair. He'll do that later.
Good for him.
Brody put together these stories for us, and originally it was going to be one episode. Then we kind of realized, no, there's way too many to fit into one show. So we have a two-parter on prisons, and we also, in addition to the stories, we have a fun little article about some guys who went into Shepton Mallet prison playing video games.
Yes, that was in the news last week.
There we go.
Buggers.
So we'll be talking about all that after the break. But before we get there, of course, we've got to thank our patrons.
This one's for the patrons.
Patrons, we could not do what we do without you. So thank you. Thank you, thank you. For real, guys, every single person who downloads the Ghost Story Guys, you help make us who we are, but our patrons are the ones who truly allow this show to continue. Without you, it just wouldn't happen. And so while we'd like to thank all our patrons, we would especially like to thank our latest patrons. They are
Mama D,
Edgeman Selleck,
G,
Christina H,
Nucleus 54,
Barb Irwin,
Shadow Wolf 145,
and Rachel von Ravenstein. Again, guys, thank you so much for your generous support of this show. Again, we appreciate everyone who listens, but folks who support us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Patreon are the ones who really enable us to keep going. And for that, we are deeply, deeply grateful. We'll wait till the end of the show to tell you about all the cool stuff you get, but we will say for $1 a month over at patreon.com, you get an ad-free feed. Who doesn't want that? Ads suck. Click the link in the show notes for more, or sign up at patreon.com/ghoststoryguys, or to GSG Premium via Apple Podcasts or YouTube. All right, we are going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Stories of Haunted Prisons, Part 2.
The Cube. This experience is from November of 2018, and I'd been working at this facility for the last 2 years at that time. For context, I'll try and describe what our floor looks like. There's an elevator bay with a big metal door controlled by a motor and chain. This is what we call the main or main slider. All traffic comes to the floor from this door. You go down a small passage and you're in a square space with a smaller square room inside it called the Cube. The Cube is surrounded by 7 pods for inmates. Each of these pods has 12 cells and can fit 2 inmates in each. The Cube is used for controlling doors and basically is an office space where the paperwork can be filled out and you can sit and watch all the pods during your shift. I'm assigned night shift on a floor of non-violent inmates and general population. A typical inmate that you'd find on this floor would be drug users, drug dealers, petty theft, and the occasional drunkard kind of deal. I was working this floor by myself and the night was starting off as usual. I showed up, locked down all the pods for the night, conducted my head count, and went back to the Cube. An hour later, I conducted my hourly block check, found everyone asleep or just chilling, so I returned back to the cube. The second I sat down, I heard the sound of someone kicking a cell door. So I got up and started flashing my light through the pods, eventually narrowing it down to B pod 6 cell. One inmate was frantically screaming that his cellmate was shaking and coughing up blood. I opened the door, removed the inmate, and saw that this cellmate was actually foaming at the mouth and performing what was known as agonal breathing. Essentially, we're listening to them take their final breaths. I called for medical aid and he was eventually taken to the hospital, but he didn't make it there. I came to find out that the inmate had swallowed heroin before he was booked, and one of those packages had ruptured whilst he was in jail. It's unfortunate, but it's not the first time it's happened, and I'm sure it won't be the last. We went back and watched the footage of the incident, confirmed that there wasn't any kind of assault or general roughhousing that would have caused the packages to rupture, and there wasn't. I filed my paperwork and continued about life as normal. The next night I was assigned to the same floor and did all the same things. Show up, lock down the pods, conduct the head count, so on and so forth. An hour went by and I did my standard check, went back to the cube, and again, as I went to sit, I heard 3 loud bangs coming from what sounded like B-pod. I went in flashing my light and found everyone, again, either asleep or chilling. I returned back to the cube and received 3 more bangs. This time I referred it to my touchscreen to see if the kicking was tripping the lock sensor in the door. Sure enough, the B-pod 6 cell is showing that it's been messed with. But that cell was still locked down due to the events of the previous night, so there shouldn't have been anybody in there. I went to the cell, opened it, double-checked to make sure nothing and no one was in there, and it was all clear. My next thought was that the lock was obviously malfunctioning, so I exited the cell and walked back to the cube to call for maintenance. As I was on the phone, the door of the cell slammed shut, which sent me back to look out. By this point, I was at a loss for words and I had no clue what to do or what was going on. Also, all of the inmates in the pod were also now trying to figure out what was going on with their pods. I was trying to answer their questions, but generally I had no clue what to tell them. Eventually it went quiet, and when the maintenance team arrived to check the lock, they found absolutely nothing in terms of it being a mechanical malfunction. After that night, I asked my watch supervisor to be placed on a different floor, and I've been on this floor now for a little over 2 years, and still get little things that I can't explain, such as audible footsteps from around the cube and the occasional tapping on the glass of the door to the cube, but certainly nothing as drastic as that night back in 2018.
I was actually listening to a podcast that actually just straight up stated this the other day, but it was the paranormal just seems to sometimes happen to people who don't want to have it happen to them. Like not even to sort of like a, ooh, it's scary kind of way. It's just so contrary to everything they've thought about the world that they sort of have a natural resistance to it. But once it happens, there's just nothing you can do. Like once it has happened to you, and I think this is where we get a lot of like skepticism. They try to sort of pick it apart and, oh no, it didn't really happen. But I think no matter how much you pick it apart, I think you just know then in your bones that there's something more to the world than you thought. And I think for some people, and in the case of some of this particular guard, I think it's really distressing.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing. Stories like this from prisons are quite interesting because one of the key aspects that I think often gets overlooked is that the people involved can't escape from it.
Oh, well, yeah, which is a terrifying thought.
Well, it's the worst kind of haunting because it's like that scene in The Watchmen where all the criminals are laughing at Rorschach and he starts laughing his head off and they say, what are you laughing at? I said, I'm laughing because you're all in here with me. And then shit's about to go down.
Yeah, I'm not locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me.
It affects people on a different level, especially when you're in that kind of lesser crime area of a prison where you've got kind of low-level prisoners in there, essentially, and inmates who are, people for petty crimes or whatever, or substance abuse. And so when that kind of thing starts rearing its head, it's obviously a very traumatic situation because, as you say, I think this is one of the things of, sadly, when people get arrested and they're carrying, they will take incredible risks. And at the end of the day, you've got, lethal amounts of drugs separated from your internal organs by a very thin plastic bag, which unfortunately, as happens in this situation, could burst at any time. Could even burst based on what you'd eaten, because it could cause a chemical reaction that could burn through the plastic.
I was going to say, I mean, I feel like if you're going to eat something like that, at some point you have to throw it back up, do you not?
It goes through.
Oh, it does go through. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. I would have thought that the stomach acid would break it down, but I guess not.
Usually they will give themselves laxatives to get it through the system quicker, because the idea is you don't get caught.
Right, I understand.
And usually in circumstances like that, prisons or police officers will have a toilet sieve.
Oh, interesting.
So everything gets caught and then has to be checked, and then you can flush
Right.
it. It's not just drugs, obviously. Diamonds, other expensive precious gemstones and gold can often try to be hidden in that manner.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I have no doubt. I mean, a little while back, I read a book about Rikers Island, the holding facility outside of New York. And it was eye-opening, we'll say, as to some of the things that people would try to sneak in.
Oh, if you got room for it, somebody will find a way to get it in there.
Yeah.
I was hearing a story earlier about a prisoner of war camp, and somebody sneaked in a typewriter. And the first thing I thought, and I was like, how the hell did he get that in a prisoner of war camp? I don't even want to know. How do you sneak a typewriter into a prisoner of war camp in Asia?
You look uncomfortable. Bob, is something wrong?
I don't know whether they was it key? Did they take the keys off? I don't know. Where did the ink come from?
I have some ideas. I don't like any of them. I'll be honest with you.
It just keeps reminding me of Butcher's Watch in Pulp Fiction.
Well, yeah, that's fair. A lot of stuff reminds me of Butcher's Watch in Pulp Fiction. I don't know what that says about me or about that film. Yeah.
Oh, Christopher Walken.
I was actually just reading, because obviously that film is 30 years old this year. And
no, surely. It's 20.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I had exactly this conversation with a bartender after Texas Chainsaw, because he mentioned, I haven't seen that in 25 years. And I was like, I don't think it's been. And then I realized, no, I'm at the 30th anniversary screening. Yes, it's been 25 years. Okay. But I was reading like an oral history of Pulp Fiction, and they were talking about that scene. About apparently it was a very, 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 very difficult scene to keep a straight face. Now I want to see the version of that film where it's a typewriter. Kept your father's anyways. Nope, never mind. Nope. This is going to lead into a very bad Christopher Walken impression. That wouldn't be funny, and then doing a version of the scene that would be less funny still. So we'll just stop here.
But going back to the noises, I think the interesting aspect of that is that the paranormal event seems to be based on the inmate that made him aware of the problem, not the inmate that died.
Oh, interesting. I had never thought of that. Oh, fascinating. So what do you make of that?
That's very interesting there, because that is essentially saying that the emotional response of the person who wasn't in trouble has imprinted in the environment, whereas you would suspect it would be the inmate who was sadly dying of an overdose, especially that breathing, which, you know, if you've ever had the misfortune to be in a situation like that, or you've seen someone close to you who goes through that, they call it the death rattle more commonly.
Oh.
You can tell when someone's going because their breathing just starts to... It's a sure auditory sign that things are close, for better or for worse, sadly. But over here we call it a death rattle.
I've heard the phrase death rattle, but I've not heard one. I'm not sad about that, I'll be honest.
Yeah, it's one of those strange sort of things that happens towards the end.
I wonder if this points to sort of a more, I don't know, because there's to a certain degree, you know, we've discussed the notion that we create some of these things, like say with poltergeist activity. We've talked about like we to a certain degree create our own reality that way. And I wonder if there's something to that in the situation where it's like maybe it didn't imprint, but maybe because it was a traumatic thing for him, like maybe because he kind of plays it cool in the story, or she, we actually don't know. But I wonder if maybe it was more distressing than they're letting on.
Oh, of course it will be. you've got to be very blasé about these things when you're in that working in such a professional capacity. Otherwise, it'll drive you mad.
Right, that makes sense.
It's the same if you're if you're an ambulance driver, an EMT, firefighter, police officer, soldier. You will see things that will turn other people's stomachs upside down in an instant. And for people in those walks of life, it's a day-to-day occurrence. You will see the most horrendous things. And sometimes I don't understand how these kinds of people can detach it. And obviously, it's the cliche that we always see in cop shows, a hard-drinking murder detective and all that. But you've got to think, if all you deal with is homicide and death in your job, how on earth can you ever switch off?
Yeah, no, that's a very legitimate question. I do wonder that myself.
And so there must be some, I would imagine, like you say, it probably wouldn't be the first person they've seen pass away, especially if they're working in a prison in such circumstances. And I doubt it, as they refer to it, it'll certainly not be the last. And so this is the thing about prisons, is that I think people often forget quite a lot of people pass away in prison for a variety of reasons. I'm amazed that not every prison in every country around the world is not haunted as buggery, because there should be.
Yeah. Well, I do wonder, I mean, given what we know about sort of the notion of non-physical entities that kind of feed on emotion, which I genuinely think is a real thing. You wonder if there are more of them at these places, but not everyone is able to perceive them. Like I sometimes wonder if maybe prison is just such a chaotic environment that you're not getting them. And also maybe just these are not things people want to talk about. I mean, I know, again, when we did episode 1, I went through some former like ex-con Reddits and threads and other places. And, some people would bring it up, but a lot of people they kind of want to shout it down. They didn't really want to talk about it. And I wonder if it's just because it is yet another thing out of your control in a situation where you are already completely disenfranchised. Rotunda. I worked as an officer at a prison, and although I have moved on to a new facility, I have been an officer for the past 12 years. One of the major skills I have learned is how to retain and recall small details which help recount events I witness. This makes report writing much easier and is helping me recount these events here. The prison I worked at was the oldest operational in my state and was built in the 1870s in an old style with a big brick wall that runs the prison's perimeter. The place has been updated over the years, but some areas still operational had little done to them since it was built. When I started, the old heads told all of us that the place was haunted, given everyone who had died over the years. Different places more than others, like the old unit that was segregation, or what some people might know as the hole, with all its prison graffiti. I never gave it much thought because if I don't experience it, then it's just a cool story. I had worked there for 8 months when I first saw something strange. I was working overtime at night on what's called a one-on-one, where you have to watch a prisoner who is feeling suicidal. It meant that I needed to stay up all night and check to make sure the prisoner was breathing every 15 minutes or so, and I had a partner who walked by every 28 minutes so they knew I was awake. It was about 2 a.m., and I had just used my flashlight to illuminate the cell of the prisoner I was watching and confirm he was indeed breathing. I looked down to mark the check on my clipboard, and I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. My partner had just done his round 15 minutes prior, and all the prisoners were supposed to be locked in their cells, so there shouldn't be any movement down there. I turned and saw someone doing a round on the housing unit, but he wasn't right. This guy was wearing a blue uniform with a Breton cap, shiny black leather belt, and a baton in his hand. The problem is that these uniforms haven't been used by my department since the 1950s, and our uniforms are not blue, they are gray and modern, whereas this one was old. I watched this guy walk down the unit for maybe 5 seconds, then I shook my head and slapped my face to make sure I was awake. When I looked back, he was gone. My second experience happened roughly 2 years later, during my normal shift. The central building of the prison I worked in is a big room called a rotunda. It has 2 floors but is open so you can see the balcony up on the top levels, and anyone who is leaving the rotunda can be seen from the opposite side, even on the balcony. The doors into the wings that branch off the balcony all have windows, and most of the rooms directly connected have windows as well. It was maybe 2100 hours, and I was going to the rotunda with a coworker to complete some paperwork for my sergeant. As we were opening the barred gate to get into the rotunda, I looked up and noticed, through the window in the door, that the administrative wing lights appeared to be dimmed. I commented to my coworker that we would need to report that a light was out in the administrative wing. It was then, as we were both looking at the window, that we observed something move in the window, and we realized this was not a light malfunction. A shadow person was standing in front of the window. While we were watching, the shadow moved to its left and through a solid wall into another room. Then we saw it in that room through the window. We just looked at each other and kept going. My third experience happened about 3 years into my stint as an officer. I was working the third shift in the control center, which is where we use the cameras and security measures. Also, there are several rifle posts around the prison's perimeter that are used to ensure the security of the prison, but we only ever use 3 of them during operational hours. In this case, it's important to know that when a phone is left off the hook, the phone rings into the control center so we can address the issue. When the call rings through, you can pick up the phone and hear anything on the other end that may be being said in the area, which is important in case we are dealing with a staff assault or a hostage situation. So I was working as the electronic monitoring officer, which means the camera controls are my main responsibility, along with the perimeter security. As I was working, the phone rang, and the institutional caller ID said 1 post, which was odd because that post is not used. It's too small for a modern person to comfortably fit inside it. Also at that time, there was nobody that should be near it, and for someone to reach it would have set off at least 2 security alarms, which I was in charge of monitoring. Given the fact that the guy who was doing the perimeter checks was a bit of a prankster, I figured it was just him playing a prank and that he knew a way around the sensors. So I answered the phone and all I heard was static, continuously increasing and decreasing in volume. I hung up the phone and moved the camera to look at the post, and there was no one there. As I was looking at it, the phone rang again. This time my lieutenant picked up the phone. After a minute, he asked me if the perimeter officer was playing games, because coming from the 1-post phone, he could hear mumbling, blurred out by static. He saw that I had the camera pointed right at it and that there was no one there. The lieutenant told me to have the perimeter officer check it, because an animal may have gotten in the post and knocked the phone off the hook. The officer took a while to get there. During this time, the phone continued to ring from 1 post until I could see the officer opening the door, at which point the phone stopped ringing. The officer opened the door with his flashlight on and called over the radio that the post was empty. In response, the officer held up a disconnected phone line. This post has not been used since the early 1980s. The phone would continue to ring on the third shift off and on until we updated our phones to an internet-based system. Coincidentally, I had been an officer for almost 4 years when my 4th experience happened. I was working my regular shift as the electronic monitoring officer. I went on a restroom break, which meant I had to leave my post and go about 100 yards away to the nearest restroom. As I was in the restroom, I distinctly heard the sound of boots on the tiled floor of the hallway leading to the restroom. As the sound got closer, I heard the large Folger keys clinking together on someone's waist as they walked. When it sounded like they were right outside the door, I called out saying, "I'll be out in a minute," and I didn't hear any sounds after that. Thinking someone was waiting outside, I hurried up and washed my hands, not taking more than a few minutes. When I opened the door, there was no one there. The hallway is long enough and has loud enough doors they couldn't have gotten out of there without me hearing them leave. I returned to my post and asked my sergeant if he saw anyone go into the wing while I was down there. He said he didn't and asked why. Knowing that he was someone who believed in ghosts, I told him what happened. His face went slack and his eyes got large as he said, "Go check the video." I returned to my position and watched the video of that hallway, the hallway of the wing above it, and the areas outside the wing. No one was in that area during the time except for me, and there were no signs of distortion. My 5th experience happened in my 6th year, while working my regular shift. I was watching the medication lines after the dinner lines were done, and my sergeant was talking with me. Not like a management thing, we were friends and just wanted to have a conversation while ensuring prisoners weren't passing meds, fighting, or worse. The medical hallway I was watching is connected at one end to the rotunda and at the other end to one of the main housing blocks, specifically right next to our main segregation unit. As we discussed this, we heard what sounded like muffled talking from a radio. Checking our own, we realized it wasn't us. We began searching the area around us. Given the location, there shouldn't be an unattended radio, so it was a security issue and of some concern. As we proceeded to search the area, we realized that the intercom system speaker for the segregation unit was what was making the sounds. This intercom, unlike a standard housing unit, is not used frequently, which is why we were surprised to find it transmitting sound. The sergeant pointed at it and said, "It must be broken. The switch is in the off position and the activation light is off." I looked closely and got goosebumps as I made a shocking discovery, saying, "Sarge, how's it doing that when it's not plugged in?" I held up the unplugged cord leading out of the intercom box and gave it a slight tug to show it was directly attached to the box. The sergeant's face went white, and he walked off shaking his head, saying, "Nope, nope, nope. Those intercoms don't have backup batteries, and there are no direct power hookups. Just the cord that I had already shown was disconnected." The sounds continued for the duration of the medication lines. I left the area after that and never heard of it doing that again.
I love a haunted phone story.
I was thinking exactly the same thing. I never get sick of phones that are ringing when they shouldn't be, and phones or stories of voices coming through speakers that are not plugged in. I think they're among my favorite paranormal stories.
Yeah, it's interesting as well. One of the things I find most interesting about that particular aspect of what they're saying is that it carried on until they removed it and replaced it with an internet-based phone system.
Yeah. And I would, I was thinking like you could argue that it was a fault in the lines, except for the fact that it stopped as soon as someone walked in the room.
Mm.
Because electrical faults don't care who's around. They don't get performance anxiety like my friend. Yeah, my friend. You don't know him. He lives in Canada. Wait. Shit.
Ah, right. Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, it to me, it does seem like, because there's so many stories as well of, like we heard footsteps until I stepped on the top stair. And then they stopped. So it's almost like there's like a disruption that having another like bioelectric signature disrupts or causes somehow. Like it breaks whatever chain. Because I mean, I guess you could suggest like, oh, the ghost is just shy. But I do wonder if there's like an actual, it's like some electrical thing that gets disrupted when an observer is there.
Well, maybe there's the electricity that we emit at all points, does that cause enough interference to block the signal of whatever's causing that receiver to ring? And that's why it stops as soon as it gets in the room.
Yeah, like because you wonder, like, if this is like the dead, for example, or some entity causing issues, is their ability to exert influence on our world so weak that just having someone else around is enough to disrupt it?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favourite stories is from over here, from a book called Credible Witness, which was written by former police officer Andy Gilbert, who I spoke to right back in the early days of the show. And in his first book, he's got a very interesting phone story. Would you like to hear it?
I absolutely would.
Okay. So this is at Betley Signal Box, which is near Crewe in Cheshire, here in the UK. And these are all first-hand reports from former or serving police officers that shared their experiences with Andy when he was writing the books for charity. And so this one says, in April 2011, I was working in the British Transport Police Control Room, which was located in Birmingham. A call came through from the ambulance control room that they had received a call from the railway signal box in Betley near Crewe. The ambulance control room said they didn't know what the call was about because it disconnected. The signal box called another 3 times and the voice spoke only once, saying, "Ambulance, please." The BTP control then phoned the signal box. The call was answered, but no one spoke, and concern naturally grew as to whether or not someone really did need that ambulance. Calls were then made to Network Rail, who said that the signal box hadn't been in use for 5 years, but they had confirmed that the ambulance control had passed the right number for the box. The controller then made a further call, and when the call was answered, the voice sounded strange. The male identified themselves as the signaller, and the sound of a train could be heard in the background. The controller then tried to confirm why the ambulance was needed with the male, but the call once again disconnected. In view of the confusion and the situation, police officers were sent to the scene to investigate. When they reported back that the signal box at Betley was now demolished and had been done so 5 years earlier, all the control room staff on duty were left completely baffled by this incident. And Andy adds, as a matter of interest, official railway records show that an accident happened here at Betley Road on the 17th of November 1954 when a Class D freight train was travelling down the slow line at low speed in fog. The train ran the signals that were showing red at the entrance, and it then collided with the rear of another freight train. This caused the engine to overturn and the driver was fatally injured. The fireman and the guard on the leading train also received injuries and were taken to hospital by ambulance for treatment.
Again, you sort of think, okay, so that's because we've heard variations on this story, like a call box keeps calling or whatever, and think, okay, so it's an electrical fault. But this is someone actually speaking.
Yep. And two different people from two different organisations contacted it, and at both times the call was answered.
Jesus.
Good one, that, isn't it?
Oh, that's so good.
And fairly recent.
Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, I mean, I do wonder how much the era of like VoIP communication has affected this stuff, because you just wondered, like, is there something specific about phone lines that can be influenced or affected in a way that digital signal can't? Like, I'll say one thing, and this is my old man yells at cloud moment here. I think that traditional wired phones, the quality is so much better than VoIP phones. And the biggest thing is, and I don't think a lot of people remember this, there was no fucking lag. I remember having phone conversations with people and there was no talking over one another because there's a second or two lag. Now, maybe I'm misremembering, but that is my recollection. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I also remember those wonderful moments where you get a cross line.
Oh, yeah.
Hello? Who's that? Is that Audrey? No, Audrey's not here. Audrey, is that you? No. Do I sound like Audrey? No. Oh, sorry, you must have got the wrong number. No, you've rung us. I haven't. You're like, oh, for God's sakes. Stuff like that. But it always makes me chuckle. I always takes me back to those days in the noughties when Art Bell would tell people, are you on a cell phone? Stand still.
Yeah.
Are you outside? Come in. He hated them. Even
like when I did Coast to Coast back in 2016 or 2017, whenever it was, they had a rule you had to call from a landline. And I actually had to go because obviously it's quite late when the show airs on the West Coast. I had to go and I had some retired friends who still had a landline. I had to go to their house and just sit in their spare room and do my interview there. Because again, they're the only people I knew who had a landline phone still. Telus keeps trying to call me and sell me on a landline. I'm like, I don't. Just so there's another place for phone scammers to call me. I don't know why I need this, guys.
I just like picking it up. But hold the front page.
yeah, having one of those big old black rotary dial phones.
That's how you could have a teenage bust up in those days.
Or get pissed at Spider-Man.
Or I could just go to Brittany in France and see if I can find one of the legendary Garfield phones. Do you know the Garfield phone in France story?
The Garfield, I do not.
So the beaches in Brittany, since the early 80s, keep having sporadic deliveries of Garfield phones wash up on the beach.
Okay.
And they think that a tanker must have lost a crate or a cargo or a ship went down in the early 80s, mid-80s, that was full of these Garfield phones. And because they're made of plastic, they're just bobbing around the sea, around the world. But for some reason, they keep washing up in Brittany in France.
This is some bullshit, because on the west coast of Canada, we get feet, and the French just get Garfield phones.
I'm sure they get other bits, but, there's all kinds of stuff, especially here, because you've got, in the UK, you've got wreckers' rights. So if stuff washes up, you can just take it.
Seems fair.
Which famously happened a few years ago was it Cornwall or Devon? And a tanker capsized and all the stuff came in. It's like people turned up, they were nicking Harley Davidsons and all sorts, just riding off with him.
Jesus Christ. Okay, yeah, and yet again, Canada gets fucked because when that happened outside Revelstoke, it was a cheese truck. So I just got a bunch of free cheese, which again, it's not the end of the world, but it's not a Harley Davidson either.
I bet you were going, Edam!
All right, folks, well, why don't you go look up photos of Garfield phones floating off the French coast, and we will take a quick break for some ads.
The pub. 3 years ago, I got a job in a pub in my local town. When I told my dad, he told me some history about this certain pub, and I was fascinated. The pub's situated next to the town's police station, and before it became a pub, it was part of the town's prison. In the cellar of the pub, there's a blocked-off cemented wall. Behind, actually, is a whole underground tunnel system. Once upon a time, it would have linked that pub to the police station and various other buildings in the area. I worked at this place for just under a year, and whilst I was there, I started to date a guy that lived there. He told me about a few experiences he'd had since he moved in, mentioning that on his first night there, he slept in what was to become the living room, and he said he was shaken awake and heard a voice say, "Go home, this is our place." Once he had officially moved in, he went to an upstairs room. He said that room had so many experiences such as the door slamming, rapping on the walls and other strange noises that he didn't feel comfortable in there either and moved into the bedroom that was next door to it. When I first spent the night there, I was quite excited but also a bit nervous. I wanted to see if I could possibly experience anything, but at the same time I felt a bit scared in doing so. I didn't hear anything that first night, but I did notice that the atmosphere in the pub changed during the early hours in the morning. The atmosphere became almost oppressive, and it gave me the impression that I was being watched. I'm aware that that might sound a bit corny, but it honestly felt like that. About 4 months later, I worked the late shift in the pub. Pub was closed and the only people in were the landlords and myself. We sat at the bar chatting, and I heard the men's toilet door open. My back was to the door, which was about 10 feet behind me. I then heard someone walk across the wooden floor and heard the sound like keys jingling, for as if the keys were attached to somebody's belt and they were slapping against their thigh as they walked. As I turned to look around, I said to my boss, "Who else is in the pub? I thought everybody had gone home." And lo and behold, there was no one there. I asked my boss if he heard this noise too, and he just joked that I'd obviously drank too much. But the noise I heard, especially with the keys, was so loud I was puzzled why only I'd heard it. Another time I was sitting in the boyfriend's room, and he said that that room felt eerie at night, and he was sure something was going to happen. He went to go to the toilet, and so I was sat alone on his bed. There was no TV on as we were listening to music, and had paused it while he went to the toilet. From the middle of his bedroom, I heard a very loud growl. It didn't actually frighten me, although it probably should have, and for some reason it made me laugh, and I had the strange urge to growl back. But due to my knowledge of growls usually coming from demons, I chose to ignore it. Later that night, we both went downstairs to get some crisps. The cellar to the pub was locked, as it always should be when not being used, and we had to walk past it to get to the small kitchen for the crisps. We heard a noise behind the cellar door which sounded like somebody rustling about 10 packets of crisps together, which is very odd. We both looked at each other puzzled, grabbed the crisps and started to walk back upstairs. About 3 steps up, we heard a huge thud in the cellar and a knocking on the door and what sounded like a full box of crisps being kicked down the stairs. We actually ran up the stairs quickly at that, as not only are no crisps stored in the cellar, but we were far too frightened to open the door and take a look. The week after, the boyfriend, his mum and I were sat in the kitchen. Next to this kitchen was a long corridor which leads to the downstairs area of the pub. We were all sat about talking when we heard a little girl run down the corridor and giggle. The boyfriend had a 3-year-old niece called Ellie who often visited, but she wasn't due to visit that day, so we all stood up and said, "Oh, Ellie's here," and we went out to greet her. When we did, there was no one there. We were all then a bit freaked out by this time, because we'd all heard the running and the giggle very clearly. I think the weirdest experience I had was when the boyfriend's parents had gone on holiday and he asked me to stay in the pub for a week and keep the flat upstairs safe. I just finished a shift and went upstairs to the flat. I decided to phone my boyfriend just as I was opening the door to the flat to ask him what he wanted for his tea. He answered his phone and we spoke for about 2 minutes, but I couldn't seem to turn the lock on the door. I told him that I couldn't get into the flat and he laughed at me and said, "Maybe that's the ghost didn't want me there." As soon as he said that, the phone signal went bizarre. We suddenly heard about 20 other voices all speaking at once, none of which were understandable and some which sounded very panicked. I then managed to turn the key in the lock, open the door, and the voices on our call stopped. We both said that was very freaky and decided to hang up. Let's just say the hour I sat in that flat alone, waiting for him to come back from work, was rather unsettling. It was probably just a bad signal, and we somehow had crossed wires, but it didn't feel like that. There were many other things that happened whilst I worked there, such as rapping on the walls, things falling from shelves, but I just got used to it, and it didn't bother me after a while. I asked the owners if they'd ever considered holding a paranormal night there just to see what was picked up, but they refused by saying they had to live there and would simply rather not know. Or rather, they are aware of everything that's happening and clearly do not wish to entertain it, as they hope that means it won't happen anymore.
I kind of get it. I think I might feel the same. Because again, I'm torn between the capitalist in me that's like, bitch, let's get that paper, and the coward in me, which is like, no, we're just like every other problem in my life, we're going to pretend like it's not real. So I get it.
Yeah, that sounds fun. There's lots of places like that, especially over here.
Well, I was wondering if you might, like, if that might sound familiar to you, because I feel like there can't be that many pubs made out of made out of old prisons.
Yeah, well, most police stations had holding cells. Obviously, the main ones do, but I'm old enough to remember when we all had sort of local police stations which had holding cells. The area I grew up in, much to my sort of regret looking back, I actually went out with the local policeman's daughter. So, hello, Kelly, if you're out there.
In Dubai. Or Qatar, or wherever it is. Wink.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Paul Bestel breaking out his Ouija board to call his ex-girlfriends.
Good night, God bless.
But sorry, I interrupted.
And so when I went round once for tea, he showed me the cells, and he got 2 cells in this little local police station, and it was essentially a house with a police cell built on the side of it. And so there's a lot of these that have been repurposed as they've centralised policing here in the United Kingdom. So there's tons of these places scattered about.
Interesting. Actually, that just reminded me of something. It's the craziest shit, and I keep forgetting to tell you. So I was contacted, of course, via Instagram. That's where all the insane shit happens these days. If someone's going to tell you something crazy, it's going to be in a fucking Instagram message.
Yeah. Dan Stevens. Hi, Dan.
Yeah. Hi, Dan. Yeah. Nice to have you listening. Loved Abigail.
I'll never forget the guest, Dan. Thank you.
Also this. Yeah. No, that's okay. Banger after banger. Anyways. So I was contacted by someone asking about this particular house in Revelstoke. They said, I heard you wrote a book about the place. We haven't read it, but they had read it. And they said, you mentioned there's a brothel that was the result of, or like a place where a murder was committed because of this brothel. Is it this house? And they gave me an address, and I said, no, that's not even close. The murder you're describing happened in Lower Town, which is completely opposite end of town. I asked why. And they said, well, my friend works in this house. This house is used as sort of temporary housing for workers up at the ski hill. And it turns out that there's like tunnels in the basement, and the rooms upstairs lock from the outside, and they have slots for sliding food through. And we were trying to figure out why. And I said, I don't know, but that sounds like some serial killer shit to me.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think sometimes people just forget that, especially depending on the age of buildings, they will be repurposed. And often, sometimes you'll find the most incredible original fixtures and fittings that you think, why does my house have a cell?
Well, that's it. And this is like, there's like 10 of them. There's like 10 bedrooms, and they all lock from the outside. And again, they have slots to slide like food through. And I've kind of done a little bit of digging and sort of asking around. My only memory of this building is as a curio shop. That's the oldest memory of this building. I was a little kid, and I remember there was like a little bottle in the window and like a lace curtain. And apparently I had a vague memory of it being like a weird antique shop. And apparently it was in the late 80s. But beyond that, I haven't found anyone who remembers what the fuck this place was. But apparently it was a place where they locked people in their rooms. So I can't imagine that's anything good.
That sounds like a mini jail.
Yeah, that's it. But as far as I know, the jail has always been on the other side of town.
You have an overflow just in case?
Maybe. I might have to poke around more. It's bizarre. It's one of those things where I'm not totally sure I want to know the answer, if I'm honest.
I think the best thing to do there is a seance.
Yeah. Well, when you're done with your Ouija board, send it over.
Yeah, stay with me.
Just in case it talks.
It always talks to me, Brennan.
The Ouija board might be going to Qatar next. Guys, I don't even know if this joke is public on the show, but either way, it's very funny to us. We're having a great time here. After the Tuesday we all had, we deserve it.
My Ouija board wouldn't do that to me.
That's right. Well,
speaking of, speaks to me so nicely.
Isn't that the parrot from The Lion King?
It's Mr. Wriggles in there.
There we go. Well, speaking of uncomfortable mysteries, you solved one during the break, the mystery of the Garfield phones.
Yeah. So there was a French recycling team who did some digging, and they thought this is all just strange because this has been happening since about 1984. And so if you Google it, there's loads of pictures of like bits of Garfield phone that they've recovered over the years. And they just couldn't understand. They just kept appearing. And I was thinking, well, this has been going on. So eventually in 2019, one of this recycling team decided to do some exploring and found an underwater cave next to the beach. And inside this cave was the container, which still had some Garfield phones in it. And that's why they kept appearing on this beach, because they were just being washed out of the container and then deposited on the beach around the corner.
That's so great. It just imagine if they had not found that and had been left for future generations. After the collapse of civilization that's coming next week, they just, the mutant crab people eventually stumble across this container of plastic Garfields, and they're like, well, this must be a religious icon of some kind.
Who was Garfield?
Yeah. Lasagna becomes their Holy Communion. They hate Mondays, Who
is Odie?
Or Odie's like their devil. John is God. Garfield's his son, his only son, and Odie is the fallen angel. Hey, this is me recording later. Of course, I can't believe we forgot Nermal. Nermal would absolutely be Garfield's Antichrist. My mistake. And when they dig this tape out of the wreckage, man, maybe we'll get to be apostles. I'm kidding. I don't think the world's going to end. I'm just being an asshole.
Today.
Well, I mean, what is it? No, what is it? Adrian Veidt says nothing ever ends.
Exactly. And having survived the nuclear holocaust in the 80s here in Sheffield, I can assure you things do get better once your limbs regrow.
I was talking about Threads to someone, and they'd never heard of it. And I said, oh, it's like a post-apocalyptic nuclear story set in Sheffield. And they're like, Sheffield? How can anyone tell the difference? I know. I couldn't wait to tell you.
And where were they from? La-di-da, Kensington.
Oh, man, it just made me so happy. I'm like, Paul's going to fucking hate that. I can't wait to tell him. All right, so we're going to take a quick break from the stories to go through this article we found. And I just think this is probably the best way anyone's ever thought of to explore a haunted prison. And this is from The Guardian. The headline is, "Our ghost meter went crazy. We played horror games all night in a haunted prison." Now, of course, ghost meters are nonsense. However, I am all down for haunted prison games. The subtitle, "Halloween is coming and our minds are turning to scary games, but which titles are genuine fright fests?" Our writers decided to find out in the most ill-advised way possible. The story goes on, Shepton Mallet Prison in Somerset is the world's oldest correctional facility. It is also reportedly one of the most haunted. Between its opening in 1625 and its closure in 2013, it saw hundreds of inmates, from Victorian street urchins to, I feel like urchins is such a shitty word to use. These garbage people, these human turds.
Jack the Ripper was right.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't know, urchins. Just not, guys, don't use urchins. Jesus Christ.
Street urchins. People. Oh, especially these days, people might think you're on about sea creatures as well.
Well, the way the carceral state is growing, if they started locking up sea creatures, I wouldn't be surprised.
Why not? And that's how SeaWorld started, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess we already have ocean prisons. Fuck. Aquaman right now is just real upset.
Where's Submariner when you need him?
That's the guy who should have got another movie. But anyways.
He might do, yeah.
I suppose. All right. So anyways, street urchins to wayward American GIs to the Cray twins. Now a tourist attraction, it occasionally opens to paying guests who want to spend a night behind bars. Some are paranormal investigators, some are brave tourists, and others are video game journalists with a silly idea. How scary would it be to play 5 recent horror games all night, locked in a haunted prison? Carrying just a torch, an electromagnetic field detector, and a laptop, we wandered the prison, finding spine-chilling locations in which to play these immersive supernatural masterpieces. Here is what happened. And we're not going to go through all of these, but there's a couple again, we had to share some of this. So the first game they played was The Exit 8. They did that in B-Wing Level 3, which is the largest of Shepton's Victorian prison wings, designed to hold 94 prisoners in tiny cells which didn't even have toilets until 1998. Cell 30 is said to be haunted by an inmate who has been known to tap unwary guests on the shoulder. The game is a cult psychological thriller from indie developer Kotak Create, which has you walking through the seemingly endless tunnels of a Japanese metro station, trying to find the exit by spotting anomalies in your surroundings. The visual realism makes it incredibly unnerving, especially when the lights flicker and other lost passengers start to pass silently by. The scare factor, they said, unnerving rather than terrifying, but playing in a prison wing, which has a similarly stark, soulless, and municipal feel, definitely increased the sense of liminal anxiety. And we're going to go through a couple more of these, but I'm kind of curious, Paul, have you heard many stories from Shepton Mallet?
Yes.
Yeah? Can you share a few?
It's pretty well documented these days. It is some people would say it's one of the most active sites in England. Like it alludes to there, it was a prisoner of war camp for our troops during World War II, which is what the reference to American GIs is. So
okay.
It was used for American, Canadian, and Australian Commonwealth soldiers who got out of hand or went AWOL or caused crime in the local area. They were sent to Shepton Mallet. And then it was turned into kind of like a bit of a maximum security prison from sort of the 40s onwards after the war had finished. And that's why the Krays ended up there for a bit before they were then sent their separate ways, and obviously Broadmoor. So that's kind of shows you the clientele it was hosting in that particular era. And it was one of them. It just kind of trundled along and just kind of got mothballed and got less and less people being sent to Shepton Mallet until it closed up, like I say, just over 10 years ago. But it has got a real reputation as being a very active site, as you would imagine. And like I say, it's the oldest prison still standing in the United Kingdom and will be 400 next year.
That is a hard thing to get my head around. Like, I know we've talked many, many times about how, everything in England is just older, that's just how it is. But again, to think of a place being 400 years old and still in existence, a structure is just a difficult thing to conceive.
Yeah, house I grew up in was built in the 1750s.
That's madness. Like the house that I used to own in Revelstoke was about 100 years old, and that was the biggest pain in the ass possible to maintain. You cannot imagine. So think of something like 300 or 3 times that. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, some of the country houses around here, Hardwick Hall, which is about 20 miles away, I think was built in 1520.
Madness. And speaking of madness, there was another game they played called Panic Core, the screen grab of which looks pretty fucking terrifying. The caption says they did this in the exercise yard, reportedly built over a mass burial pit and haunted by Captain Philip William Ryle, who was imprisoned at Shepton during the First World War. He threw himself off the roof overlooking the yard, and people have seen a ghostly figure lurking up there. In the game, you are a paranormal investigator exploring a series of derelict buildings and solving puzzles while being pursued by AI-infused monsters that respond to any sound you make. Yes, it's Blair Witch Project meets Alien Isolation, and just as terrifying as that sounds. We played solo, but you can opt for co-op, a la Phasmophobia, which would have been preferable under the circumstances. And the scare factor says, the fact that this game's ruined institutional buildings looked just like Shepton Mallet Prison, with peeling paint on the walls, rubble everywhere, and doorways leading into total darkness, made this a truly horrifying experience.
The captain is the ghost that lives in that location, I think I remember. And he must have been pleased because he's quite vocal by all accounts.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe he's a gamer. He's a Blair Witch fan.
Maybe. He's not as bad as Pervy Bob, the gatekeeper.
Dare I ask what Pervy Bob does?
He runs his hands through women's hair.
That's not great. I guess the nickname is come by honestly.
Yeah, I've just decided to call him Pervy Bob. They just call him Bob.
Oh, okay. was going to say, yeah, I guess that's a hard thing to advertise. And we got our ghosts. We have the captain. We have Perfect Bob. And we have so many other. What was that other one you just said? No, that was it. The captain?
Mr. Stinky.
Yeah, Mr. Stinky. All right, so let's have another look at another game here. Chucksy. The location, they played this in C Wing. It says that this is a woman's wing of the prison famous for one particular figure. The white lady who is convicted of murdering her fiancé and asked to wear her wedding dress on the night before the execution. She had been seen on the stairs of the wing, and visitors have also smelled her perfume wafting past. Paul, this cannot possibly be real.
Why not?
Okay, sure. This is like the Roger Maris of ghost stories. There's a big old asterisk next to it.
Well, it would be easy to track down because obviously we keep records of things like that. Because obviously the most famous female prisoner who was executed in England is the last one, which was a lady called Ruth Ellis, which has become a cause célèbre over the last 30 or 40 years. Basically, she shouldn't have been executed for what she did, but she was.
Fascinating. I mean, no one should be executed because I think giving the state the power of murder is a really bad idea. But yeah, I imagine. What did she do?
She murdered her lover.
Okay. Well, we'll murder her. That'll show her. This will nicely stop the cycle of violence.
Yes, absolutely. It was a crime of passion. It was a violent relationship, and she shot him in self-defense.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, again,
she was still hung.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like if you, again, don't kill people, just generally speaking. But I feel like if it's going to be in self-defense, it seems like a weird thing to.
Didn't matter in those days.
Yeah, they fucking hang an elephant or a gorilla or some shit. So I'm not surprised.
It was a monkey, and that was in Hartlepool. That's why we call them the monkey hangers.
There we go. Well, it's all the same place.
Hey, they once set a man free who shot somebody pretending to be a ghost. So let's not say British justice is outdated.
No, pardon me. It has evolved with the times.
Because that wasn't his fault. He shot what he thought was a ghost. He didn't know it was somebody pissing about.
I just have to imagine the shock of that ghost because that is a very American response to paranormal activity.
Well, lots of people had guns here then. So.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize there was a point where guns were more common.
Yeah. It's they kind of started being phased out. I don't know.
After a guy was shot for pretending to be a ghost.
No. I mean I think that actually happened during the Spring Hill Jack flap.
Oh, okay.
When that was all kicking off, and somebody was running around London pretending to be a ghost, and somebody came out of a pub and went, "Fucking hell, there's a ghost!" and shot him, and it was a butcher having a laugh. Well, he wasn't anymore.
No, well, he was for a little while.
Yes.
Oh man, that's rough. I mean, there's a lesson there.
Yeah. I'm not. I mean, to be honest. The one thing I remember is we had a mass shooting in the 80s at a place called Hungerford in Hampshire, which was quite ironic because I had family that lived in Hampshire at the time. So I've driven through Hungerford tons of times. And there was an ex-soldier called Michael Ryan who basically went on a one-man killing spree and just ran around the town shooting everybody, killed his mum. I think he killed a police officer. I think he killed 13 or 14 people, and he had pistols, automatic rifles, all sorts.
Jesus Christ.
And that kind of brought it down massively. And then 10 years later, we had the Dunblane massacre, where a guy turned up at a primary school in Scotland and murdered 24 children.
Good Lord.
And the internationally famous tennis player Andy Murray was at school that day. He went to Dunblane School, and he was locked in the sports hall on the day that the man turned up and murdered some of his classmates.
Oh, man, that's terrifying.
Yeah. Fate is a strange thing. That was 96. And the law was tightened even further after that. And since then, I think we've had 3.
Well, still 3 too many, but I suppose that's better than the alternative.
Yeah. And 2 of them were in quite close proximity. One happened in Cumbria, one happened in the northeast, and they both happened around the same period of time. And both were people who had completely broken, just gone, lost it, and just went on the rampage. Obviously, one was quite famous because a local former footballer turned up at the siege with a fishing rod, some fish and chips, and a 4-pack of Stella, trying to talk him out for this standoff with the police.
Okay.
And then the police said, "No, we'd like you to go home, sir," regardless of the fact that you were very famous. And then he woke up the next morning and he'd got 6,000 messages on his phone saying, well, basically people saying, what the fuck were you doing last night? And he just basically said, because I'd lost the plot and I'd been in rehab, I'd just done five gram of Charlie, and so I'd try and help the police. So yes.
Well, I'm glad we were able to end that on not quite as dark a note.
Well, obviously, the siege didn't end well for the person on the run, but...
Well, no, that's fair.
The ex-professional footballer turning up off his tits added a bit of levity to a nationwide manhunt.
Oh, I do like my nationwide manhunts with a little bit of levity.
It helps.
All right, so we'll just finish up this the Chucksy that started all this. The game apparently is a viral hit on TikTok and Twitch. It is effectively a J-horror jump scare machine. And the screen grab here looks a little bit like the game Fear, if any of you are old first-person shooter nerds like I am. You're a paranormal investigator exploring an abandoned hospital filled with ghosts, including a terrifying woman in a white dress. Spooky figures pop up behind you or appear for a few seconds in darkened passageways, and the visuals are detailed enough to make your grim surroundings feel very real. And in keeping with their theme, Paul, the screen grab they show here, a man is pointing a gun at a ghost. So this fine British tradition lives on to this day.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is a crime here to shoot ghosts.
I feel like that's probably for the best.
So, but yes, it's one of the stranger paranormal incidents in history here of a murder of a ghost. I'm sure it's happened in other places, I would imagine. I would imagine most countries have somebody pretending to be a ghost getting shot somewhere. I think it all depends on where you're doing it. I mean, you could do it here now, and somebody will probably just give you a black eye.
The One-Armed Woman. One of the facilities I started working at housed only females and was built in the 1950s. It was a real jail, not the fish bowls that are more modern architecture. This was all expanded metal and steel bars painted a comet green color, cold, hard tile floors, concrete block walls layered with decades of paint, rows of open stainless steel toilets adjacent to gang showers, a light sheet of nicotine veneer coating everything. You know, Paul, I don't like to interrupt stories very often, but I just want to say this person seems like a piece of shit. I want something that looks like Terry Gilliam's Nightmares after he finished making Brazil. That's what prisons should look like.
I want to see inmates fighting over rats.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Or the rats fighting inmates.
People pooing in their own eyes.
The way prisons used to be. Anyways, yeah.
Good old days. We could beat a man and nobody'd say anything.
I'm glad we took the citation out of this so I can talk shit about this person at will. Anyways, moving on. There were 6 isolation cells by the office area. The officer working the post had to type up the daily roll call, every inmate by name, spelled correctly, each day after midnight. Working on typewriters, not computers, so unless one was quite adept at working with correction tape, whiteout, and/or erasers, if you spelled Smith as Simph, you'd get to do it all again. In between typing, every 15 minutes you had to walk the 6 isolation cells and ensure everyone in them were breathing and not hanging. Sometimes typing the roll call could absorb your whole 8-hour shift. One of my sergeants was a hardcore veteran of over 40 years in corrections, but she still preferred her original title of matron. She was the one who first told me the story of the one-armed mute woman who was found hanging in Isolation Cell 6 in the 1960s. Sarge said you could see her when the nights were quiet, there was no moon, and everyone in the house was asleep but you. Speculation was you saw and never heard her because she wasn't able to speak when she was alive. She came back over and over, according to Sarge, because, quote, ain't no way no one-armed woman hang herself. This is their only way to tell someone done something they need to pay for. Of course, I thought this was just some bullshit. To this day, there's an intricate set of rituals informally designed to toughen you up as an officer. It runs from pranks to gory/scary stories, extremely inappropriate jokes to straight-out hazing. You never know what you are being tested on by your fellow officers, or the inmates. Saturday night. Come on duty an hour before midnight, get assigned to the office to type that damn roll call because no one else on duty knew how to type. The ladies in isolation are having simultaneous psychotic breaks, apparently. Everyone howling, crying, screaming, banging their doors. Cigarettes and coffee for all. We didn't have much in the way of mental health treatment or medications back then, so we all self-medicated together. And sometime around 3 a.m, everyone was out. It's as quiet as 200 women ever will be. A light roar from the air handlers, a slight snore from one of the cells. 4 officers and a sergeant in the building, including me. I go to make my 20-plus cell check of the night, and at the end of the hallway I saw an inmate with a headscarf in one of our pink institutional dresses, leaning halfway in the door at the end of the hall looking right at me. I looked back at her and said, "Hey, why are you out?" As no inmate was allowed out unescorted after midnight count and morning feed up. She just stared. We stood there looking at each other long enough I took a mental photo of her I can still see. I asked again, "Who let you out?" Her expression changed to one of intense sorrow, and she leaned back out of the doorway. I walked down the hall, went through the door into the next hall, looked down the length of the whole facility. All the dorms were in a straight line with one long hall in front of them. No inmate. The 2 officers in the hall were asleep on their posts. I walked down to the only other place the inmate could have gone, the property room. The officer in there was asleep as well. No inmate. I could have heard one of those giant metal doors opening and closing anywhere in the facility. After realizing I never heard a door open or close to either let her out or in, I went to the sergeant's office, where she was snoozing as well. And I told her I thought we needed to do another head count. I told her what I saw and what I did to follow up. Sarge asked me what color her headscarf was, and why she was wearing one. At that time, no head coverings were allowed. I really didn't think about it when I was looking at the inmate, but I said it looked like the same pink material as the inmate's institutional dress. When the ladies were allowed to wear headscarves, they saved the leftover fabric for making the dresses in the sewing shop. We had not run a sewing shop for 2 decades. "Yep, you done seen the one-armed woman. She's leaning in the door because she don't want you to see she got one arm. She's telling you to listen, don't talk so damn much. Go back to your post." And, I mean, that's sort of an unusual one. I don't know, I feel like the tone of it, we haven't really had like a very kind of arch tone. I feel like most of the people who've been posting have been pretty even in the way they've referred to inmates, whereas this one felt a little bit more dismissive.
Yes. I mean, it depends, because obviously I wouldn't necessarily say I know more than most, but as I said, my best mate who was from Wakey, his dad was as we call him here, a screw, which is our term for a prison guard at Wakefield. And so he was a lovely man, but you wouldn't want to cross him, And I never heard him chat shit about any of the inmates. And like I say, some of the worst criminals in this country's history have gone through Wakefield. So he had to deal with some very dangerous people, and still had the respect to speak to them as people and about them as people. And I think sometimes when you hear people who work in the prison world, you will find those people who seem to have nothing but complete disdain for everybody in there, when in reality everybody's one bad decision away from being in prison. And as with anything, there for the grace of God go I.
Yeah, man.
You've never lived until the police have stitched you up and you were facing 15 years, mate. That's when you know what living's like.
This is one of the many stories of Paul Bestel that I would never want to have to experience. Like, you've had some cool shit happen in your life, but if they said, "Bren, you can have those experiences, but you also got to take the time the police tried to frame him and many of the other horrors which you've endured over the course of your existence," I would say, "No, thank you. I'm going to go roll my hoop."
Yeah, me and 9 other people, and 6 of us were acquitted on the first day of the hearing.
That's insane.
Yeah. Well, they'd lied. They'd falsified evidence, and my arrest photo didn't look like the person they were describing me as. Am I 6 foot tall? No. For a start. And did I have jet black hair? No. At the time when I was arrested, I had blonde dreadlocks because I was a raver.
So what the hell were they doing?
Basically, the local police officers at the time, South Yorkshire Police, were the most corrupt police force in Britain, and basically just thought they could get away with anything after everything that had happened during the miners' strike. So they were just basically running themselves as like a de-armed paramilitary unit. And so they were just doing what the fuck they wanted. And so some of their children had decided that because their parents were in the police, they were untouchable. And so they were going around and beating up other kids. They were driving around in cars and beating up other kids and robbing them, basically, knowing that nobody had come back. And unfortunately, they picked on the wrong people who knew all the big hitters, who didn't need an excuse to go riot. And so we all went along just to sort of, hey, this is good. And all of a sudden, the next thing we knew, there was like 100 people there, and there was just a massive scrap. And so everybody skedaddled, and I stupidly sat there because I thought, well, I've not done anything, and they arrested me and charged me with carrying an offensive weapon, inciting a riot, a fray, criminal damage, and assault by beating, because apparently I'd beaten somebody unconscious with a 6-foot stick that I was running around the street waving above my head.
I know you're a strong guy, but I feel like a man under 6 feet wielding a 6-foot stick is an achievement.
Yeah, absolutely. 2.5 years it took to get to court, that. 2.5 years of stress.
Jesus Christ.
So we got let off, and I went and got drunk.
Fair.
And then about 6 months later, we were in the local park, because this is like, I was 19 when this was happening. So a few months later, we're in the local park just chilling out, and one of the coppers that was there was the arrest came down, and he came over and he recognised. He went, oh, yeah. And he started talking shit about it. And he was like giving me, and he just went, yeah, so how's it feel? And I said, I've been acquitted on all charges and I'm about to get some compensation, officer. And his fucking face, honestly, he looked like I'd just shit in my hands and pushed it in his face. Honestly, he was furious. He was livid. He couldn't believe it. And I just smiled. Yeah, been acquitted, sir. Been acquitted, officer. Getting some compensation. I got $5,000. Wrongful arrest, false imprisonment.
Jesus Christ. So he was actually just coming over to gloat about the fact he had framed you.
Oh, yeah, because some of his mates were getting stoned in a car. And you do that thing. Never seen them, sir. No idea. Well, you don't know who they are. Clearly we did.
Right.
Of course we did. We knocked him out with him all the time. But they were driving, they drove the car in a place where you shouldn't have a car. So the coppers, somebody reported them. And so they'd come, and then he'd come over trying to talk shit, and whimpered off with the tail between his legs. And they'd got a bong, and when police turned up, they'd just put it under the car. This is how clever they were, these police officers, right? So this bong is under their car. And so they arrested them all and took them away and left the car there. So while the police took our mates off, obviously, well, we didn't know them. Mind you, it's 32 years ago. I'll be arrested now.
Yeah, I think you're safe.
You never know with SYP.
Well.
And I'm sure they've still got a vendetta out there. And so, because they were too busy trying to like, whoa, we've got these four. Whoa. None of the lads had got anything because they dumped it all under the car. Because they were so busy getting them arrested, we went under the car, cleared everything out, cleared all the evidence out, all the bongs, all the marijuana, everything. Got rid of it all. Fucked off. So there was no evidence left, and we checked because we made sure, we knew how to make a scene clean. Can't we say? And so when they came back, because none of the lads had got anything on them, and they didn't have drug testing kits in them days, they all said they got hay fever, and they couldn't prove it. They couldn't say they didn't because they all breath tested them, and none of them were drunk because they weren't. They were all getting stoned. They weren't drink driving. They were, stoned. And so they went back, and obviously because they'd gone back, searched all around the car, there was no drugs there, so they all got let off because they were too stupid to do their job properly. Dick.
Oh, man.
So that was another win to Mr. Smug Officer. On your bike.
Well, I think before we move on to the last story, I actually think that's a really great point just in terms of like the prison thing. Because I think when bad shit happens, and I know we have cops who listen to the show, so we're not coming after you specifically.
No, some of my friends are police officers. This is
Same
not
here.
like, bad coppers are bad coppers. Doesn't mean all coppers are bad. And there's enough bad coppers out there over the years for you can't really say, Christ, you can't get into the Metropolitan Police here unless you seem to be a bit dodgy, it would seem.
Yeah. It's funny, actually. When Nick first came over here, she was like, because she worked in the police, right? So she was very like favorable towards the police. Like she was of the mind, like, if the cops pull you over, well, you must have done something. And if you haven't done something, you got nothing to worry about, kind of thing, right? But anyways, the point I wanted to make is when police violence happens against someone, quite often they'll look and they'll say, well, that person, they were no angel, and that always has to be mentioned. I feel like they always say, well, that person was no angel. And like, well, they've done other stuff in past. So, well, maybe they did the thing. And I think the story you just told is a great example of like people can get up to all kinds of rascal shit, but that doesn't make it okay to just do violence on them or to abuse your power towards them. Just because they did one thing doesn't mean they did this thing. You can't damn someone for just across the board for their actions. That can't be how things work, especially again when you have power. Like there is this thing some people do where they're like, well, we have no power anymore. No, you have all the power. And to pretend otherwise is ludicrous.
Absolutely. You can't. There's been enough incidents over recent years where people with criminal records have been killed by police officers, and that argument gets put forward. Well, they had a criminal record. What does that mean? They deserve to be shot? That's fucking stupid. Where do you draw the line of what a criminal record is? I mean, it's just ridiculous. The police's job is very tough. In a lot of instances, it needs root and branch reform in the modern era. However, you also have to facilitate the fact that funding has been cut, their hours have been extended, the population has grown, and the numbers of officers have not grown with it. They've centralised everything. There's no community policing anymore. Their job has got harder, certainly here in the United Kingdom. Here we've had 20,000 police officers removed in the last 14 years from the streets, and then they wonder why crime's gone up. I mean, it's fucking stupid.
So just to interject, I think it's important for our listeners to understand that policing is different in the UK than it is in North America. I know funding for the police, it's just different. If I know a lot of our listeners are in America. We are talking about the situation in the UK. That's what we're specifically referring to.
Yes.
And to support Paul's point, that was one of the things that forced Nick out of the police when she was living over in the UK. Was there was less and less funding, fewer and fewer people were being expected to do more and more work, and they were crime scene investigators. So things are started to get missed or not done the way they should be, and that was a very difficult environment to try and work in because, generally speaking, you've got people, or she was working with people who wanted to do a good job.
I mean, I was watching a prime example of this. I was watching a documentary the other day about a murder in Australia in the mid-60s, and a couple had met up on a date and they'd gone for a drive and they were murdered in cold blood somewhere. And it turned out she was not with her boyfriend. She was with the person she was having a fling with. And so the Australian police had decided clearly it was the boyfriend, even though he got witnesses saying it wasn't him, whatever. And the police arrested him several times. They beat him in custody to make him confess. And in the end, he just left and went and said, I can't deal with this because they're going to think it's me, whatever. Everybody's going to think it's me because they didn't catch the guy. And so nobody knew what had happened. And I mean, this was one of those throwaway lines that somebody says, and you just think, you idiot. 6 years later, this kid who had been wrongly framed or suspected of being the murderer drove his car at full speed into a wall in Singapore on the anniversary of her death. And they said, yeah, it was one of those tragic coincidences. And I was like, a tragic coincidence? He's clearly taken his own life because of the guilt he feels and the trauma he suffered after everything he's gone through in the previous 6 years. It ended up that then the decade after, this whole area there was a sexual rapist running around this particular area who was monitoring homes and choosing targets where women were on their own. So he was obviously in the area and they couldn't find him. And then 1985, a woman rings the police up and says, I just want to report there's a man sat outside work masturbating in his car. And so the police turned up and arrested him and they got his fingerprints and they ran it through the computer. And wouldn't you know, who's the rapist? Who's the murderer? It's this random bloke who lived in area who was known as a well-known member of the community who was a little bit peculiar. And they caught him by accident because he decided he couldn't be bothered to go home. And they only caught him by accident. But it was too late. All these women had suffered. This poor guy had killed himself. This couple had been murdered. And the police didn't care who'd done it. They just wanted somebody. Because this kid who ended up taking his own life said to his best friend a couple of months afterwards, I'm just going to tell him I've done it because I can't deal with this anymore. And they were going, you can't. You haven't done it.
Yeah.
And that's how it used to be. And you can't go on like that. Just because something bad happens doesn't mean it's necessarily the bad person you think it is. Because history is littered with people who have gone off the tracks and turned their lives around and made positive contributions to society, to life, to their families, changed things for people. And just because somebody's got a criminal record or they've lost their way in earlier life does not mean that they should suffer that for the rest of their life.
No argument here, man. No argument here. People make mistakes, but people can also make something themselves. They can also atone for those mistakes. And I think we do have very much like a very, again, like kind of punishment oriented mindset. We want to rule people out, you know, like I don't know exactly where that comes from. I guess maybe just like that, the sense of security that comes in like, well, it couldn't be me, you know, like I wouldn't make a mistake like that. Therefore I am comfortable treating someone this way.
The 30th anniversary. I can't speak for most inmates, but the prison I was at definitely had something around. I'm not religious, and I was extremely sceptical towards anything any inmate told me. In my head, you couldn't spell convict without con. However, after 2 years at my unit, the small rumours I heard from officers and inmates made it clear to me that there was something supernatural around. The first sign was that my unit celebrated its 30th birthday when I signed on, meaning it had been built back in the 1990s. This unit was derelict and too old to be updated, and too full of inmates to be decommissioned. It was obvious this place had housed its fair share of unhappy residents over the years. In one building, an officer had hung himself in the control booth. You could sit and stare at the railing where he'd made a noose and done the deed. The unit's response to this had been to manufacture a blue and white wristband displaying a crappy "United We Stand" slogan. Oof. I was put on constant watch with one inmate who was transferring through our facility. He was headed to a hospital, but was stopping with us temporarily. I brought up the history of the building to him and asked what experiences he'd had with the supernatural in prison. He didn't have anything to add, but his neighbour dropped his arms out of the cell bars to tell us a little story. He'd been sleeping one night only to be awoken by something grabbing his blanket. Half awake, he was thrown to the floor. He jumped to his feet, but whatever had been there had gone. He rushed to his door and looked around thinking that an officer must have been pranking him, but the officers were fast asleep in the control booth. I knew one officer, Hasselhoff, who trained me day one. He was always working 1 Pod Delta because he was extremely adroit at handling his inmates. He was prior service, in his mid-40s, and one of our best co-workers that I had ever had the privilege to call a friend. I'm not sure what brought up the conversation, but he told me he'd been feeding a row of inmates the day before his vacation, where he felt a dark shape creep up behind him. In case you didn't know, anyone who's been in prison, inmate or officer, has the sixth sense of a cat on its 9 life. Officers would swing on anyone who came behind them too suddenly. We were always constantly watching around us. I recently met up with a few old friends and prior co-workers at a restaurant, and while I'm usually able to blend in with crowds, my friend who arrived before me saw me before I got within 10 feet of her. Inmates too were loath to leave their backs unguarded. We all had finely honed reflexes. Hasselhoff told me he'd turn round in time to see the dark shape pass him and disappear. His eyes bulged and his body tensed as he told me, his body language daring me to challenge him. Another co-worker became a full member of Delta. He and Hasselhoff were friends as well with shared military backgrounds. This officer, Krog, and I were close friends, drinking and watching movies together on our weekends. He told me his story, which lined up with Hasselhoff's. He'd been feeding in the same area, and the doors leading to the outside recreation yard and day room opened once and slammed around him. Bear in mind, these were electronically controlled doors, and they could only be opened from the control booth or with a key, which we didn't use. If they had opened, they then had to be closed manually, and there was no amount of wind that could loosen these locks. My experience happened multiple times. When running showers, I would escort inmates into the area's solo shower and lock them inside. There were 6 areas, and I would fill up the showers, then do a round, passing each shower until all the inmates would yell, "Shower ready!" which meant they were ready to be escorted back to their cells. On multiple times, I would walk by a shower and see an inmate inside. I would then turn back and say, "Hey, you ready?" Only there were multiple occasions when there ended up being no inmate in that shower. Once or twice I could pass this off as my eyes playing tricks, but this then happened enough times that I would swear I saw an inmate in a shower. But on inspection, there would be none.
All right, and we are out of time for commentary. We got really worked up about prisons on this one, Paul.
I think we should always be passionate about doing better.
I agree. And especially, again, given this last Tuesday, that feels more, more pertinent than ever.
Always do the right thing.
Yes, sir. In fact, I read a quote, and I put it in the script here. I heard it on the podcast, It Could Happen Here. They said, agency is the opposite of trauma. And the more we act with agency while bad things are happening, the less they destroy us emotionally. So stay safe out there, folks. And, do what you can. That's our message from here in the Ghost Story Guys. We don't want to, this is not a political show, but you know what we're talking about. All right. That has been The Haunting of Prisons Part 2. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with our Ghost Force shoutouts. Hey there, listeners. Before you reach for that skip 15 seconds ahead button, I promise you this isn't an ad. We wanted to take a minute to talk to you about mental health. On this show, I've always tried to be as honest and open as possible about my struggles with depression and anxiety, because even though we've come a long way towards acknowledging the very real damage these things can do, there is still way too much lingering stigma about reaching out for help. And when you start to feel like there's no help, it's easy to start feeling like there's no hope. But Paul has joined me today to remind you there is always hope and there's always help.
We're not going to try and talk you out of self-harming right now, because we know that's not how it works. Instead, what we wanted to do was tell you something now and hope that should things get bad, you'll remember it and make a phone call or send a text message before you make any permanent decisions. As someone who knows all too well just how important mental health can be, it's never too late to reach out.
In Canada, the number to call is 133-456-4566. In the USA, the new number to call is 988. That's 988.
In the UK, the number to call is 116123, or text SHOUT, that's SHOUT, to 85258. In Australia, the number to call is 131114.
However bad shit seems, it will pass. And no matter what your brain might be telling you at any given moment, and believe me when I say I know this intimately, there are people who love you and people who care deeply about how you treat yourself. Should a time come when you find yourself despairing, please know that we've both been where you are, and there is a way back to the world. Take care. Welcome back. The Ghost Story Guys are Luke Greensmith, who helps us find our stories. He's also host of the Luke Lore podcast, available everywhere fine podcasts live. Brody Daniels, who helped us find the stories for this episode. Tanya Downing, who manages our Facebook community. She's also co-host of the podcast Streaming into Madness with Walter Whitaker. Sarah Kent, who helps manage our Reddit community.
Our paranormal warden, who locks the gates to protect us from the darkness outside, is Mr. Brennan Storr.
And of course, my friend and co-host is the one, the only, the inimitable Paul Bestel, the paranormal Johnny Carson himself, host of Mysteries and Monsters. Paul, what's coming up on M&M?
I'm taking a trip around some of Scotland's hidden haunts in the company of the marvellous W.J. Gilbert, as we delve into some of Scotland's lesser-known stories, but also have a chance to talk about one of the weirdest, strangest, and most disgusting events in Edinburgh's history, which is the Wizard.
That sounds just the Wizard. That is ominous.
Oh yes, oh yes. Though not much takes me back, I have to say. When I heard about this a couple of years ago on another podcast, Rich McLean Smith's Unexplained, it's one of those stories when you hear it, you're like, how have I never heard this before? because it's batshit crazy.
Okay. Where can everyone find you online?
You can find me masquerading as Mysteries and Monsters across most social media platforms and podcast sites.
Fabulous. I'm largely the truth on Threads, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Letterboxd. And you can find my daily horror fiction podcast, Fear Daily, narrated by Brandon Scheck-Snyder, everywhere fine podcasts live. As we said at the top of the show, we couldn't do this without our patrons, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube subscribers. We are grateful for every single one of you. We have an awesome community of people, especially on Patreon. And we value each and every one of you. And if you would like to join that community, support the show by clicking the link in the show notes or by going to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. That's patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. Or again, by signing up to GSG Premium on Apple Podcasts or YouTube. You get bonus shows, extra conversations between me and Paul, our monthly live show, and of course, the Ghost Force shout out on every Second Story show. You can get all of that at patreon.com/ghoststoryguys or by signing up to GST Premium via Apple Podcasts or YouTube. And if you are part of that special group, you know the one. I just said the name. I fucked the whole thing up, Paul, but that's fine.
What do you mean?
I don't know. We're just going to pretend like it didn't happen. Because
What
if you do, I don't know. I'm very confused.
Good.
Okay.
I'm glad to hear it. I'm always confused.
Because if you support us at the $20 level and above, that makes you part of an elite club. That makes you part of a little something we like to call Ghost Force. That's right. Patrons who support the show at the $20 level and above get thanked every Second Story episode because you're insane and we love you for it. What he said. This time around, the members of Ghost Force are
Ethan Saragon,
Crazy Mom Canada,
CT,
Floey Two Hats,
Gabrielle Hollandes,
Hannah Brown,
Hannah Siemens,
Hilary Dissassour,
Jade Moores,
Jenny Bonanani, Jenny Bonanani, Jenny Bonanani,
Jason R. Slaughter,
Slaughter, Jennifer Mullen,
Jennifer Shipley,
Joseph Como,
Kissing Kate Barlow,
Mara Noriega,
Mark Sumler.
Megan Rocket,
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, lift off! Merlin Hansen,
Nicola,
Peter Guns 08.5,
Rebecca Brink,
Robin Keaton,
Rockin' Ronnie Shenanigans,
Scrap Bat 13,
Shannon Steyer,
Trent Cannon.
You are the few, you are the spooky, you are Ghost Force. For real, guys, we cannot tell you how much we appreciate the members of Ghost Force. Again, we deeply appreciate every single person who supports the show, but Ghost Force, you guys are at an entirely other level, and we love you for it. If you'd like to have your name read out as part of the Ghost Force roll call, head to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. That's patreon.com/ghoststoryguys, and support at the Ghost Force level. You can also support us at the Ghost Force level on YouTube. Apple, unfortunately, does not offer that functionality, as Apple keeps stripping functionalities because Apple is garbage. Paul, any guest spots coming up?
Not at the moment. They're being ironed out. So, other than my surprise last-minute appearance on Paul Sinclair's Truth Proof live stream last week, which I got asked to 5 minutes before he went live.
No way.
Then he just rang me up. And he said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm just about to have my tea." He said, "Oh, when you've had your tea, do you want to come on live stream with us?"
That's awesome.
That's a Yorkshire conversation. When you've had your tea, fancy a gymwag, kid. So I did. I went on for the last hour and a bit. It was really good, talking about ghosts and paranormal encounters and the supernatural. And it was, I think there was eight or nine of us on there. So it was a good, good bit of a chinwag. So, yeah, all good. It was a nice surprise, actually. I was very humbled to be asked to join him. And, yeah, great.
Very cool. Well, again, we'll put a link to that in the show notes, at the blog at ghoststoryguys.com. We have a link to all of our guest appearances in there. If you'd like to pick up some Ghost Story Guys merch, head to our website at ghoststoryguys.com. We've got t-shirts, stickers, all kinds of cool stuff. And again, that's ghoststoryguys.com. You can also find us on Facebook as The Ghost Story Guys. We have a group called The Ghost Story Guys, finally made a group. Come on, hang out. We would love to see you in there. And of course, we were also on Instagram as The Ghost Story Guys. Our theme song, Radio, Into the Darkness We Go, is composed and performed by Peter Kursov of Pizzanta Music. You'll find more from him by searching for Pizzanta Music wherever you get your tunes. And I guess that's going to do it.
Well, we'll be back next week. But until then,
Into the darkness we go.
So the Garfield phone mystery was solved back in
No. I was going to say let's read the story and then
Fuck the story.
this is a Garfield phone show now for the Garfield phone show guys.
Yeah, I need some lasagna. Talking about Garfield.
All right, I'm just going to find the musical guest real quick.
This week it's Sting with his new single, I'm a Soulless.
I love how much you hate Sting.
Brian?
Yeah.
I'm just going to have to take Theo outside. I think he needs a wee.
Okay.
So just in case you thought I'd got bored or I couldn't be asked.
Okay.
I'll
I'll
be back
finish
as
the
quick
story
as
and
I
then
can.
I'll wait for you. Yeah.
A call came through from an ambulance control. Is that me? Sorry about that. Did you hear that?
No? What'd you hear?
I had a beep. Then I realised
Oh.
Facebook was still fucking open.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I made then. Well, clearly you didn't, mate, because you've got all the skill of a thumbless carpenter. On your bike.
Fantastic.
Apologies to any thumbless carpenters that listen to us who are very skilled, probably.
That's true. We are huge in the thumbless carpenter demographic. I've seen that on our data sheets.
Yeah, very hard to nail down that listenership.
Moving on.